integrous conversations is what we're trying to have here at the Mount Angel Theater Studio. So I've got my logo up, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is, now so far, see, it is just a podcast. Isn't that funny? Wednesday, October 2nd, 11:18. Now I can go to my YouTube here, and I can refresh. There it is, live. And I can grab that. Turn. So far, see, there I was. See, so now I'm gonna close that. I'm gonna share it. So I got to copy the link. All right, folks, ladies and gentlemen, John Deschler here, coming to you from downtown Mount Angel, Oregon. We're gonna set the auto scene switcher active, which means that in 20 seconds we should go from the logo to camera number 1, and I should be sitting there so I could act like I'm smooth, see, and by the time, and I can actually use this as a little monitor too, because that's what is being broadcast right now to the entire world.
Wow.
Yeah, so let me plug this in. This is so I can get good audio. You've got that one, that's giving you good audio, and then I sit down here. But see, what happens is I want to run back over here real quick and see. Okay, good. Wave, John. Great. Okay.
Wave here?
We're coming through. It'll be delayed here by about 10 seconds.
Okay.
You see what I mean? Isn't that wild?
It is.
And Stu made this place ultimately. See, there we are. And there's me sitting down. So I'm just going to close that down for a minute. What I should be doing is going to Facebook and posting it live. And we'll just do that for the heck of it, for the joy and the entertainment. Just to my friends and the friends of the theater. So there it is. Welcome to the Mount Angel Theater Studio in downtown beautiful Mount Angel, ladies and gentlemen. It is me again, John Deschler, trying to be relevant in almost 2025. I'm here with my dear friend, Mr. John Daggett, from Portland, Oregon, and we're going to have just a wonderful conversation and introduction, which also does indicate, John, that we can do this again if we decide we want to. So if we leave something out, nothing to worry about. We'll just
okay.
We'll just do it again and add to it. As all I'm really trying to do, as I told John just a short while ago, is have some, mindful, authentic, intelligent conversations with some intelligent people about some important things. And John has had a extensive, long career in education as an educator and everything else that you can do, and we're going to talk about that. But briefly, I just want to say thank you to my dear, 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 dear friend, Roger Paulson, for his contributions in the support of the idea of me taking over this humble space in this small town, and by relationship and definition to you and Barb for your support of him towards the end of his life, as well as in the support of the idea of me taking over this space. So I have appreciated all of that the whole time through, and I've been trying to honor and respect it, mostly on account of Stu and Roger. You have to watch previous videos if you don't know who Stu and Roger are. See, I can say that now because I've had enough videos. But I met John and Barb, his beautiful wife, through Roger Paulson, my beautiful friend, a wonderful pianist, and Stu Rasmussen's business partner for over 50 years in the concession that was the Palace Movie Theater in Silverton, Oregon. So I just wanted to make all those connections so the people who know me and who know you will understand our connection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So on that note, I am going to refer to our notes, no pun intended, but John and Barb have been very comprehensive in their aiding and abetting me in this process today. So to that end, I'm going to begin. You did just turn 82?
Yep, I started my 83rd trip around the sun.
And as I recall, you had some medical scares in the last year or two. Is that an understatement?
Yeah, it was. I do this as kind of a joke. In 2022, I was 50 years old. In 2023, I became 80, as random body parts started to fall off and they had to be replaced. Enough said. It was a tough year.
I've been saying it now. It's almost 62. I know. That's young compared to some. But as you may attest, I would say by the time you're 60, if you haven't perceived that certain things are probably going to wear out at the very least at some point, if not, in fact, fall off. So I'm so glad that you're well and better and looking good and everything. So that's incredible. And on that note, I would like to ask you to remind me, because I know I've talked to you about some of this stuff before, but where you grew up and what your inception was, particularly in education, with your education, et cetera, et cetera. Just go ahead and tell me what you want to tell me, John.
Okay. I was born in Portland and was a middle-class family. My father was an engineer for the Corps of Engineers. He helped build the dams in the western United States, and then when that was completed, he was in rivers and harbors and kept the waterways navigable by working on dredges as an engineer. And I had one family, one home, one car, one toaster my dad repaired. He had raised my brother through the Depression, and so he was very frugal. But in relative terms, I was the poor kid in my school. And I didn't know that as a child because you just don't know. A kid is a kid and you play with them. But over time, I got an education in class, lower class, middle class, upper class. And
You mean real life?
Yeah.
By way of real engagement?
Yeah, real experience.
None of this modern two-dimensional stuff that I've been fighting and bucking against.
No. But the home, the family home, Dad facetiously called it the South 40, as in 40 acres. It was about an acre.
Right.
And I ate organically.
More than enough.
Because we grew a garden.
Amen.
And when we'd go to the meat market, he'd bring his newspaper and ask for a slab of fish or meat and throw it on the newspaper. And so we ate very well. And I was always a pretty healthy kid and very blessed in my upbringing. So I'm very fortunate, kind of in a naive state. I thought the world was pretty wonderful. And as a matter of fact, I, more than you, probably lived in the most opportune time in the world. I'll say this, I'll try to explain what I'm saying here. We had a strong middle class. And if you look at what our founders tried to escape was monarchy, which wasn't, it was very class-oriented and very little middle class.
Exactly.
And so I grew in a time of incredible opportunity when there was demand economics as opposed to supply economics. The opportunities I had growing up for fun and play and work were just abundant. And I thought that's the way the world would always be. And I thought everybody was going to have a great life and the world would be just fine.
And all of those formative years were in Portland?
Yeah.
Wow. So your dad was stably working for one entity at that point?
Yeah, he would leave Sunday night and go to a dam or go to a dredge and be gone most of the week or all the week. And I'd see him on the weekends.
Wow.
So I was raised basically by my mother, but I see my father. But he had a great impact on me. I'm sure my mother had a greater impact just in terms of time.
Right.
She was always very positive, very loving. But I watched my dad, and he was probably an ecologist before the term was ever coined.
Wow.
He lived that way. He lived with nature.
Right.
He had a saying that one of the the worst technology man had invented from his perspective was a bulldozer, because it gouged Mother Earth.
Yes.
He was very gentle with Mother Earth. And a quick story about him. Somebody bought the property next to ours when I was about 7 years old. We could have bought it for $500, and I wish he had, because it would have been wonderful, full of trees. But we had a creek running through our property, and that creek went into that property. And our creek was wider with rocks in it. And when the people bought the property, they made concrete walls and curves going through the property, which made the water run fast and look nice in a way. And Dad and I were standing on the borderline of our property and his, and he looked at me and he says, the water will be in their kitchen in the spring. And I said, what do you mean, Dad? And he says, we'll talk later.
He knows how water flows.
Yeah. And so in the spring, lo and behold, their kitchen was full of water.
Sure enough.
And I said, how did you know that? And he said, well, look at our stream. It could expand and contract. It had been doing that for eons. And what he did was alter Mother Nature, make it go fast.
In the one spot.
Yeah, and race through. And so when the rains came, it couldn't expand, so it went up, out, and into their kitchen. So I really began to respect my father's wisdom.
I love those lessons from Mother Nature.
Yeah, and from a dad that was aware.
Gravity.
Yeah, yeah.
There's some implicit, really good ones there.
Yeah. But I was very young when I started school. I was 5 years old. I was diagnosed with astigmatism. That means your pupil is not around. It's like a football. Made reading hard. I was very oral. And, in schools, we're literate. And there's some studies now saying we're probably too literate and not enough oral. But anyway, it was truly a handicap. And I had some dyslexia. B's and P's would flip, and I couldn't track. And I felt very dumb in school. But I was a big, happy kid, and I kind of let it roll off me. But I did, my self-esteem in terms of learning was very, very low for most of my public education career.
Really?
Yeah.
K through 12 in the Portland Public Schools.
Well, no, I didn't go to Portland Public Schools. I went to what we would call almost a virtual private school now, the Riverdale School.
I've heard of that. Where was that?
In Dunthorpe. And that's why I was a relatively poor kid, even though I was middle class.
Dunthorpe is a very high-end neighborhood from what I'm aware of.
Oh, it was. And that's why I'm saying it's a contrast. Yeah. There were kids that were brought to school in chauffeur-driven cars, and everybody had a Lincoln and Continental.
So your dad had a small house in Dunthorpe?
750 square foot house.
No way.
Yeah.
Some old.
It was probably a caretaker's home. When he bought it, my parents had moved from a
That's intriguing, John. That's historic.
houseboat. They were living on the Willamette River near the Sillard Bridge, and Dad said, we have to get off land, so he bought this property that was basically a swamp.
Circa 40...
1917.
17.
See, my father was in the Bella Woods. He was born in 1896.
Wow.
He was a Marine in Bella Woods. So
World War I.
Yeah. Not only was I kind of a slow, dumb kid in school, but I had an old father that could be the parent of the parents of my friends. So it was an interesting dynamic.
I see. That is.
We were a little bit out of touch with the culture of the neighborhood, and yet, because of their age, they were revered, at least in our small neighborhood in where we lived. And my mom and dad got along wonderfully with the parents that lived in my section of Dunthorpe.
Forgive my ignorance. When were you born?
42.
42. Okay. So, bam, smack at almost the end of the war.
Yeah, I think Pearl Harbor was
41.
I thought maybe 40, but you're right.
I think it's 41, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I wasn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
But a hell of a time to be born.
Yeah, but in a remarkable time in terms of we had pulled together as a nation, we had funded the GI Bill, there was growth, opportunity, and more egalitarian perspective than there had been.
Did you go into the military right out of high school?
I did. Well, I was 17 when I went in the Marines.
What year was that?
1960.
3 years before I was born, let's just note that. And boy, at the beginning of a heck of an era. And at that time, was Vietnam even being talked about very much?
Not then. Shortly after I went in, about a year after I went in, we had, quote, advisors
Going in.
that went into Vietnam. And I got in a tiff with a guy who had more seniority than I had in the Corps. He said he wanted to be an advisor to go into Vietnam to kill a gook. And I reminded this man that a gook is a human being, and that's not a very admirable goal, just to go. You're not hunting pheasants or whatever.
Exactly.
So anyway, we didn't get along very well.
Now, give me the short story of your service, and particularly I'm interested in, because my dad was a Marine, and he was ROTC, and that's where he met my mom at UCLA. So I'd like to know how that all worked out for you in terms of your service, your college, while I turn this volume off here.
Well, ROTC, you're talking officer. Well, I was an enlisted man.
Okay.
And I was considered a Hollywood Marine. I went to San Diego Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and it was facetiously called Hollywood Marines, but it was pretty rigorous. But I was in incredibly good shape as a 17-year-old. I was about 190 pounds with a 28-inch waist.
Did your dad have to sign off on that or something?
Mom and Dad did, yeah.
And
both.
was that because you were done with high school?
No, they actually a judge suggested that would be a very good idea for me to do.
A judge?
Yeah.
A friendly judge in a court?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
You look back fondly?
Well, it saved my life because the tragedy that preceded that is indelibly on my mind. A dear friend and a mentor, a very wealthy man. I became very good. He was like another brother to me. He taught me about international relations because he subscribed to a number of European magazines when I was in high school. I used to study with him and work out and things like that. And he said, you should go into the diplomatic corps. You should go into politics, that kind of thing. And I was young. I said, oh, you think so? Cool. Let's. And he really helped me become an academic as a senior in high school. I hadn't been before that time.
Finally.
But the tragedy was that we were driving his rather fast sports car, which was in 1958 they had the Mercedes Gullwing. It was a very fast car. The doors went up like this. And in 1959 the first Roadster came out. And anyway, we were going to my folks' house for dinner, and Macadam Road in that time, south of the Selwood Bridge, was a 3-lane highway. And a red 300 SL Gullwing passed us. And I'm 17, and I'm driving, and he nudges me. He says, "You're not going to let that Gullwing beat us, are you?"
What were you driving?
A 300 SL Roadster.
Oh, my.
A year newer.
Oh, my.
It was...
His? It was his?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was very, very wealthy.
Okay.
And very
Supportive,
gracious.
yeah.
Yeah, very supportive. Anyway, I hit the gas, and we were probably going 90 or 100 miles an hour chasing the guy, and it was 5 o'clock traffic. I was in the middle lane, and I tapped the brake to move in.
Lost control.
And the left side crystallized, the brakes grabbed. See, Mercedes wouldn't move to disc brakes until they had the technology down. So at that time, the 300 SL had large drum brakes. And one of the drum springs, they found out later, had fallen off on the left side. And so, from the right side. And so the left brakes worked and the right didn't. And I spun, and somehow I missed all the oncoming cars. I remember just everything was in slow motion, cars went around, and we hit a tree. and I had a massive whiplash, and he had a puncture wound in the base of his skull, and in a week he was dead.
Oh.
And I was 17 years old, and I was speeding, so I was culpable.
Oh,
And
I'm so sorry.
that's why the judge was very happy for me to go in the Marine Corps. They took my license away. So my life changed abruptly at that point.
That's huge, John. Wow. I'm so sorry to hear that. That would be hard for anybody at any time.
Oh, it was devastating.
Let alone
Yeah.
at 17.
Thank God, though, for the
But
Marines.
how formative and how wonderful that he was a wonderful mentor.
Oh, he was a wonderful guy.
Is it fair to characterize that way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He was a believer, a supporter, emotionally,
Huge.
financially,
Huge.
intellectually. He was an incredible
I
person.
find that one of the common threads, even just so far in this effort here, the last month, with some other particularly male people my age or older. I'm trying to be kind and politically correct to everybody. I don't know if I'll be successful. But that is always one of the key threads. That older person, usually a male in a male's life, at a pivotal time, generally somewhere in those teenage years, can make a huge difference. And I am just so sorry that in that case, in your case, in that case, it was just so dramatic. I've had similar things in my life, and so I feel that deeply. But then also the fact that you've obviously did then and characteristically throughout the rest of your life made the best you could out of every situation, which seems, from my perspective, to be our charge.
Yeah. Either that or you give up.
Right.
And so yeah.
that really laid some serious groundwork. So
And it was so lovely in a way. Lovely is the bad word. It was a good thing for me to be in the Corps because it was so demanding that my subconscious didn't dwell on that pain. And so over time, and through counseling and through working it through, I can talk about it and get the best out of it and learn from it.
I was going to ask you about your introspection.
Yeah.
Would that begin at that point in your life, or do you think it was partially influenced by either your mother and or your father, since, as you said, at least he was older? Do you think that, how do you think those things might have related? Your tendency as a young straight man in the 1950s and 60s towards introspection, which was not necessarily a pathway for everyone, particularly in that era. I mean, maybe by the end of the 60s, more so. But at the beginning, i.e., in the do you think about that as I ask you now? How, if at all, you think maybe your early childhood may have played into your innate willingness to be open?
Probably, but I can't tell you how.
Okay.
I didn't become introspective until later in life about a number of things that had occurred in my life.
Do you think your dad was introspective?
I think he was pretty shut down because
Okay.
the Bellow Woods was a brutal, brutal war.
Incredible.
And he couldn't talk about it. He talked about it very little. One of the stories he did tell was going into the Bellow Woods, the young French buglers on horses in dress uniforms, blowing horns and going into the woods with this notion that it was war had, rules and macho-ness and dignity and class and all
honor
that. And inside
and
the
respect,
Germans had machine
even if your
guns.
horse went down, huh?
And when my father got there as an infantryman, these young men were hanging from trees, their horses were slaughtered. And I think he suffered from, back then they would call it shell shock,
Right.
but it would be PTSD today.
Absolutely.
And so he was never demonstrative
Trauma.
with his love or never demonstrative with his life. And that's one of the reasons why I just recently finished a memoir for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren,
Nice.
if they want to know.
Yes. I think there's value in that.
Because I don't know much about my father's life other than
Exactly.
little teeny snippets.
Exactly.
But I learned to appreciate what I observed in the way he dealt with the world. So as little kids, I don't think we listen to our parents when we're scolded, but we watch them. When we listen to them is when they're talking amongst themselves and we're listening in.
Right.
Then we pay real close attention.
That's right. That's
But,
right.
Little children are much smarter than and intuitive than we give them credit for.
Yes. If you wouldn't mind, let's get back on this little track, back to the engagement in the military, the Marine Corps. Wow. And so someone obviously along the way, I'm going to guess, you tell me if my intuition is correct, identified you as intelligent in the Marine Corps as an infantryman. Is that possible?
Well, I maybe you're right, because near the end, I was chosen as what they call platoon honor man. And then there's 4 platoons in a series, and then I was chosen series honor man. And to get that award, I guess you'd call it, you have to be pretty all around. You have to be a good marksman. You have to be good physically. The obstacle course, I loved it. I thought it was really fun. And I still have enormous lungs, short legs but enormous lungs. I used to be 6'2". I'm now about 6 feet. Short legs, 31.5-inch inseam. But my lungs were big, and so I could run and run and run.
How long were you in?
4 years.
And where all did you go after San Diego?
Oh, well, the way I ended up in Hawaii, but the way I got there wasn't very smart, because a 17-year-old doesn't have a very highly developed prefrontal lobe. It's basically non-existent. So with all these honors I got out of boot camp.
We mean that with love to all the 17-year-olds out there, by the way.
They said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I don't know, dumb kid. Well, we have military occupation specialties, MOSs. And I said, oh, well, what jobs are open in Hawaii? See, it wasn't the job, it was where. And they said, well, there's aviation ordnance in Hawaii open. I'll take it. Okay. Now I could have learned something that was really good in civilian life. I could have learned all kinds of skills, choosing a different MOS.
You picked Navy ordnance, which is, from my limited recognition with the Marine father, says ammunition.
Yeah, my job was finning bombs and building bombs and inventorying them and missiles.
Wow. But in Hawaii.
But in Hawaii. So on the weekends I was on Waikiki Beach and snorkeling and scuba diving and playing in the sun.
In the early 60s.
Yeah, from 60 to 65, because I even got discharged there and spent another year working and being in.
And then what?
Well, okay, I got married.
Did you get a GI Bill?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I actually started at the University of Hawaii night school and struggled because of my dyslexia and my eyes were, the stigmatism, I think I had outgrown that, but I struggled reading. And then I finished up at Portland State under part of the GI Bill, but it's a funny story. At my last quarter, I needed $200 for the last quarter. And I was out of money and didn't know what to do. And so I went to my folks and I said, hey, can you loan me a couple $100 to finish school? And my mother very gently laughed at me and she says, you're an adult, you'll figure it out. I said, okay. And initially I was kind of pissed at her, But I went down to the counselor at Portland State and said, here's my predicament. I can't pay this tuition, but I'd like to finish up. And are you gonna be an educator? I said, well, yeah, that's what my degree's in. I want to fly planes, so that was a higher goal at the time. They said, well, if you do
become an educator,
that loan of $200 will be forgiven. I said, well, even if it isn't, I can pay $200 after I get a job, so give me the loan. And so I finished up school. But the corollary to that, I told you, flying was my priority.
Yeah.
So as soon as I got my degree, I had already served, 4 years in the service, and Vietnam was going like gangbusters, and people were protesting in the park blocks.
You didn't explore the concept of learning how to fly with the Marines before you left?
No, I learned to be a pilot. I used part of the GI Bill to learn to be a pilot. I got a license while I was going to Portland State. I had 3 goals: graduate from college, fly, and get on with life.
And that's because you wanted to fly. You didn't necessarily want to fly in the military.
Well, actually, I did. See, sitting out on that runway in Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station, a plane called the F-8U Crusader would fly over my head. And I thought it was the coolest looking mechanical thing invented by man.
Right.
It looked like a shark.
I'm sure it was one of them.
Air. It was
Yeah.
gorgeous. It was supersonic. And it was the last of the, they call it gunships. It had integral 20 millimeter cannon. And after that, the Phantom came out, and it was all electronic with missiles and no guns. They added guns later on the wing, but this was integral part. And it was also a single seat. There wasn't anybody flying in back.
Wow.
So I wanted to be a fighter pilot. So I ignored the protests about Vietnam, and I focused on work and flying and graduating.
Wow.
And I went to the recruiter, and he about fell over because they were throwing rotten eggs at the door of the recruiting station.
So after you did your 4 years,
Yeah.
after you went back to complete a 4-year degree,
Yeah.
you're saying you then went back to re-enlist if they would teach you how to fly.
Yeah. And they said, well, you're going to have to pass a C9 test and a physical.
And you're like 28 or something, 25, 27?
Yeah, younger than that.
20.
Yeah. 25, 26, 27, roughly there.
Okay,
20,
okay.
yeah, you're right, about 27.
Yeah.
Time, I forget the
Yeah,
dates.
yeah, I know.
So I went to Whidbey Island, Washington, and they took me apart and they said, hey, you have 20/10 vision. We like that for fighter pilots because your long distance vision is really acute. So that's cool. And because I'd been a pilot, I passed the Stay-9 easily. So I was all set to fly what I thought were Crusaders in the summer. And I went down there for the final swearing in. It was really different than being an enlisted man. There was just me, a gunny sergeant, and a captain. I thought, boy, this is kind of cool. And so I was all ready to raise my hand and go in. And the captain looked at me and he says, you've been a Marine. Why do you want to come back in? Or do you have a question for us before we re-enlist you? Not enlist you, but make you an officer, re-enlist you, I guess, in the Corps. And I hadn't even thought about that. I never thought they would ask me a question. I was like, geez, this is interesting. So then my brain went into speed mode, and I said, well, I've noticed a lot of people complaining about the Vietnam War. I don't know much about it because I haven't been paying any attention. I've been working and flying and going to school, so I know what my job will be. I used to build the missiles and the bombs. And napalm is bad. It's made out of joy, soap suds, and gasoline. And it sticks on people like jelly and burns through them. And it's really bad shit. Why are we in Vietnam? I just need to understand that so I can not go
Oh,
off.
this is the question you decided to ask him?
Yeah. And I said, because if
I'm going to do this.
Yeah, when I take off of the carrier,
What's my
I'm not
reason?
going to do lazy eights all afternoon and come back and say I did my job. I'm going to go kill people. Why are we in Vietnam? And the captain just looked at me. He says, you've already served your country. Have a good life. You're dismissed.
Wow.
So that was another big juncture in my life.
Wow. And I got to pause here to say I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but not only was my dad a Marine, and he met my mom at UCLA as an ROTC, but he did that specifically, same reason as you, it sounds like, because he wanted to learn how to fly.
Huh.
But they wouldn't teach him how to fly because his hearing. He had grown up in northern Idaho, shooting a lot of guns and stuff in the era when they weren't wearing ear protection.
Yeah.
Hunting, literally hunting and fishing.
Sure.
As a kid in the 40s, and so in the 50s. So by the time late 50s, early 60s, so he did the 4 years as a commissioned officer and all of that. But so when he got out later, and we ultimately, my brother and I were born, and we moved to North Hollywood, California, and he began his kind of career in middle management in the aircraft industry at Lockheed Burbank. He too used his GI Bill to get his private pilot's license, and in order to kind of manage it all and thwart some of the costs, at some point he bought a 1948 Stinson -3
Wow.
that I grew up in,
Cool.
and wrote a book on a directory on flying and camping in the western United States, which is when I started shooting pictures when I was in the co-pilot seat, and he'd put this nose down to say, shoot that grass strip on approach.
Yeah.
In the Minolta 35 millimeter camera.
Cool.
So that's another thing. Imagine that. I don't know that we ever discussed that or knew that about each other
No, we didn't.
after a few years of friendship here, and it's been really great. And so that, and wouldn't you say? Let me ask you a question, if I may, tangentially. When was the first time you flew
As pilot in command?
in an airplane?
Oh,
As a kid?
When I was very, very young, in a DC-3, we flew to Idaho to visit relatives, and I believe there were wicker chairs in the DC-3, and they were comfortable, lots of leg room.
But that's really like when you're flying, right?
Yeah.
None of this sardine can stuff
Oh, man,
now
it was-
with all
it
the
was
plastic,
cool. It was such a exciting thing. But as a little kid, I remember I've seen pictures of me running around the property with my hand like this. As a little toddler, airplane.
Well, because the flying was a big deal back then.
Oh,
It was
man.
relatively new, and it was advancing so quickly.
Yeah,
And I know that impacted. That's why I asked, because I know it impacted my dad. He had an uncle who was in the Forest Service, who he got a ride in the Piper Cub, I think, when he was pretty young.
Yeah.
And same kinds of things. But the DC-3, you might as well be a Piper Cub. I mean, relative.
Amazing plane. They're still flying them today.
Well, I know if they
They're just
take care of them and replace all the parts that
Right.
need a fixing. So, well, that's an incredible story about really that's your relationship with Vietnam is rather unique for the time period, I might add. And so at that time, you had and achieved a bachelor's degree in education from
Right.
Portland State.
Right.
And so you went through all of that. You're still in Portland. You thought you were going to
Fly.
And now what?
Well, I say this is kind of a cute joke. Instead of flying a Phantom 4, because the Crusaders were gone, I flew a 4th grade classroom. And I absolutely fell in love with elementary kids. And seeing that light go on in their eye.
Something else we have in common.
And I got to thank that Marine Corps recruiter, because I could have been like,
saved your life.
I could have been shot down. I also could have suffered from PTSD, because I don't think my temperament would like knowing I killed people.
Over and over and over.
Yeah,
and over
I think
and
that
over.
would really bother me. So I got to grow people instead of kill people.
Amen.
And
Give me 5 on that one.
Okay.
My God.
It's been a wonderful career, really.
And that was in the Portland Public Schools?
No, it was in the Beaverton schools.
Okay.
Started at Barnes School in Beaverton.
Wow.
And then went over to Bethany School. And then after a couple of years, my wife at that time and I got jobs in Europe with the Department of Defense schools, and spent 2 years in Bitburg, Germany. That's an Air Force base with responsibility for Israel and stuff like that.
And so you lived on base, and you taught
Actually,
all the kids and all the officers and everybody like that?
Lived off base in a little town called Stahl, as in cow stall. And the cows are in the
You
basement.
mean like moo moo?
Yeah, the cows are in the basement at night, and that helps heat the house, because
that's
cows are warm.
Yes.
and they seal up the, where the cows lived, and anyway.
That's funny.
And it was wonderful, because we were very close to France and other countries, and so we got to
She was teaching too?
Yeah, we both taught.
And you were having babies?
Yes.
Okay.
My daughter Brittany was born there.
This is in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s?
This was early 70s.
Okay.
Got married in 72.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, and this is just for the sake of time, and like I said, we can do this again, but I want to get kind of a nice overview. So 2 years there, stint with that's with the government, and then what? And specifically, where did you take a turn into you're pursuing your higher education?
I think I'd started my master's degree before we went to Europe.
Okay.
And I completed it when we came back. And I'd just taken a leave of absence, so I went back to the Beaverton schools and taught in what they called an intermediate school, which would be a
Middle school.
well, now it would be a junior high because it was
Ninth, eighth, seventh, eighth, ninth.
yeah, 7th, 8th, 9th, right.
Okay.
And I did that for 1 year, and after I got my master's degree, I got a superintendent license, and then I got a job as superintendent of the smallest school district in Multnomah County, and it was a fun job, Sylvie Island, which is the largest island in the.
How many schools?
One.
How many grades?
It had 6 grades there, and then we educated the middle and high school off campus in Scappoose by bus.
Off island.
Off island.
I love Sylvie's Island. Yeah. But it's another thing that John and I have in common is that we are both educators. And though my education career was not anything like yours, all of the things you say and all of the vibes and the feelings and the reflections that you have totally resonate with me, starting with, and which is very endearing, that you fall in love with those little kids.
Yeah.
I mean, the little kids, as a substitute, it's a kind of a different job. Did you ever substitute?
Yeah, in fact, that was my first job.
Okay.
And it turned out to be a wonderful experience, but it was terrifying because I didn't know for how long. And I walked into this school mid-year with we wore sport coats, ties, and everything. I was shaking, man. What am I going to do? Is it 1 day, 2 days? And I'm standing outside the door of the classroom, and I hear this guy say, well, I'm going to go to Salem, and we're going to develop outdoor school, which is another story. But this was in 1970, I think it was 73. Yeah.
That must have been a brand new concept and a really fun idea.
Yeah, well, it's the best thing Oregon ever did for elementary education was take kids in the wilderness for a week, and they still do it today. And he was a teacher that designed that program. Anyway, so now I find out, and I'm standing in the hallway, I'm going to be there for a whole week, and I'm really puckered up then. You know, what am I going to do for a whole week with kids I don't know, don't have a relationship with, and they're 6th graders. And so I walk in, and he walks out and waves at me and says, have a nice time. See ya.
Sucker.
I'll be gone a week, and I'll be back, kids, Monday. And the kids look at me, and I look at them, and I say, who's the class president? Who's the leader? And the little girl says, yeah, I am. I said, well, move your desk up next to mine. You're my assistant teacher. I want to know. We're going to do what you guys are used to. And I bonded with those kids and had a wonderful week with them. Absolutely wonderful.
Boy, that's key right there, what you just said. That B word is huge. And it's so difficult to do, I might add, in this modern era, particularly with the older ones.
Yeah. Let me talk about that a little bit.
I wish you would.
Kids really are interested in learning, and learning is play for them. And Einstein has said this, and other Montessori says that children's play is children's work.
Amen.
And that's why my initial job as a 4th grade teacher was so fun, because they really wanted to learn. And I could say stupid things like turn to page 42 and do whatever it says, and they would do it. I never taught that way, but I had that kind of power and control over them because they were interested in learning and me and everything. But we squished that out of kids. And by the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, we have truant officers, and a lot of them don't want to learn. Some still do, but more and more we inculcate them with this idea of stuffing stuff in their brains rather than bringing out their potential.
Amen.
I mean, you've got to have basic skills, and I'm all for that, but we also have to keep the love of learning alive.
Our natural curiosity.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'll jump to the present, we focus so much on things like STEM. Tell me what that is.
Science, technology, engineering, and math, I believe.
I think you got it.
Yeah.
But
it's one of the banes of my existence.
Well, when we focus on that, and that's not necessarily unimportant.
No, it is not.
When we focus it on, we don't have civics, ethics, values.
Oh my God.
When I first started teaching, we would have values clarification and civics education.
This is one of my pet subjects, John.
And part of the reason why we're ruining our democracy is it's predicated on an educated populace.
And we don't have one anymore.
Not wholly educated. We have fodder for the workplace training, but not the truly educated person who is curious, ethical.
From if I may, I grew up in the Los Angeles Unified School Districts in the 1960s and 70s, and my version of a lot of what you just said is classically in a shorthand rendition goes like this: when I entered junior high school, 7th grade, we didn't just have wood shop and auto shop. We had metal shop, plastic shop, graphic arts shop, electric shop, ceramics shop, horticulture, agriculture. Are you getting the point that he was making and that I'm making? You have to serve the whole entire human being. The human being was generated with all of this natural sensory perception and a feedback creativity loop for what? Our very survival.
Yeah.
And we have now, and for thousands of generations, kids have had the benefit of that intimate relationship with Mother Nature, bona fide by all those shops in my life experience, bona fide by your life experience growing up in Portland when it must have been Shangri-La in the 1950s and 40s, and all the interactivity with Mother Nature that every other, all back to the caveman kid had, which was designed for us and what actually helped design us. And now we're designing it out of us.
Yeah.
And it drives me friggin' crazy. It's, of course, as you know, a big hot topic subject in the national news. Every district, every state is grappling with what? The very small, flat, two-dimensional reality that only takes two thumbs and apparently a very small brain to operate. And I'm being slightly derogatory here. That's my prerogative. It's my spot. And to make the point really as strenuously as I can, to me, what we're doing with this in the last 10 years in the culture is the same thing we did with the asphalt, the concrete, and the fossil fuel. And if I may use that as a little bit of a segue, because I don't know how much longer we're going to want to go here today, maybe another 20 minutes or so, I wouldn't mind us tying it fast forward. One of the things that we just recognized this morning in visiting briefly before we started this was that we both have read, and I read it very recently in the last year, this Braiding Sweetgrass book, which, by the way, I know what sweetgrass is, and I love it. It's this wonderful thing by Miss Kemmerer.
Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Kemmerer. And John said something to me about it when I brought it up, in addition to saying that he read it, but that it was possibly and plausibly at least one of the most important books you believe you've ever read in your life. And I have about that much passion for it as well. Yeah. So I find that phenomenal. But I think it also goes to both of our sentiments about the realm of education in our society right now, and where we have really kind of missed the boat. And my premise has come to a little bit of a sad note when I've realized this last year. I put it up to the 3 C's. we've flattened the world into three primary focuses: comfort, human comfort, our convenience, and cash. And it's another rendition of what you might call a narcissistic society.
Yeah.
And I think that's sadly what we have done. So I'm here today with John Daggett, talking about mindful living, mindful thinking, mindful maturing, mindful processing, because I know that's what he cares about, and it's what I care about. And so it's just really, 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 really nice to sit here and have this conversation with such a experienced, lifelong educator and mindful thinker in these processes. So if I may, we'll finish off the overall timeline in a superficial fashion and go to, if we may, that time of when you, this is going to be interesting too, you pursued your master's in organization.
No, the doctorate.
What was the master's in?
In education, Master of Science, in educational leadership, and I got a superintendent credential.
Okay, and then you became a superintendent in Sovies Island, of all places. Folks, if you knew what that meant, I mean, wow, that's just kind of really fun. Talking about eat well, right?
Yeah.
And so you did that for a minute, and you had not pursued your PhD yet.
No.
So now tell me about that arc. I'm always interested, and I think many people would be interested, particularly in someone with your story, the way it kind of went, because you went back to education over and over again. And
I'd actually talked about it as a teenager, sneaking a beer in a car parked in, Washington Park with a bunch of buddies, that I didn't like the way I was taught, and that if I ever get a chance to be a teacher, I would do it differently. So it had been on my mind.
Nice.
Those two kind of things. But I want to go back, if I could.
Yes.
You talked about nature and education and how those myriad of courses connected you with how to build things and do things horticulturally.
In the physical world.
In the physical world.
Yes.
And the one thing we didn't do was teach that care of Mother Earth is paramount, because if we don't care for her, we're dead.
Sadly, in the 20th century, that was not part of it.
We have used Mother Nature. We're parasitic.
Abused
and parasitic. And we got to stop it, and we will. I believe we can. But we have to learn to cooperate, and that's a whole nother thing. We've got to learn again how to cooperate.
So now we're up to at least our third or fourth webcast, because that's one of my... I have two other tenets. One is that this country is not going to do anything right until it realizes that it has to take really good care of every baby's brain and body, but brain, we haven't done that. And that every life form is basically as valuable as every other life form.
Absolutely.
And I know that you agree with me on all of that. And these things are very prescient to me and important to me. And I don't think I've ever shared with you and Barb my old farmhouse, but I live very organically over there. And I just froze 6 gallons of plums, harvested 40 gallons of grapes, converted much of it to grape juice, dried 6 quarts of pears, and I'm getting ready to try to grapple with my apples. So I actually try to mindfully incorporate all of these things, because you and I think both respect, if I said it this way, the lessons that we learned from relationships that we had from people who were born before us in the 20th century and the 19th century that had some very valid wisdom to share with us. And I think most of that goes to the physical Mother Nature kind of world. But beyond that, just like moving slower, being more mindful.
Moving slower.
Having real conversations, John. I mean, people these days, as you see, I just heard somebody say, some college professor say, the minute she calls break, nobody talks to each other. They just go on their phone.
Yeah.
So this is about illustrating and showing off and sharing with. This is how you have a conversation, because in this God-forsaken red and blue era, and that's all I'm going to say about it, we have not brought that forth either, of civil discourse, conversation. Now, you and I are having a great conversation, and we're obviously in a lot of agreement, so it makes it a little bit easier.
You know, democracy only works if we can hold tension. And we're so wimpy now,
Right.
that we need to have a tribe, our own kin, to agree with us and support us. And if you don't agree with us, you're the other. And if you other people enough, they become objects, and you can kill them, you can hurt them. But if we've got to get back the idea that we're all connected.
Depreciate.
Every human being is connected at a very
Exactly.
fundamental level.
Oh my God! I mean, we're all brothers and sisters as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but we have to act that way. We can't just
Exactly.
talk it.
It doesn't naturally flow unless you're
Right.
unless you train that that's really the truth. And it's hard to do that when you make a materialistic society born out of comfort, convenience, and cash and consumerism.
Yeah.
And there's 8 billion of us.
You know what I find amazing, that economists they needed to have been educated in ecology. And without that education, they have ruined the world, because, for example, when a substance used to manufacture something runs out in an area, they say, no worries, go to another area and get some.
Exactly.
I don't know why they didn't think about it, that the Earth is a fixed size.
Finite.
And human population is growing exponentially. When I was around, it was a couple billion. Now it's over 8 billion.
That's right.
So if you keep using resources from a finite source as you're expanding your population, it's going to run out.
What a nightmare!
It's going to run out. I mean, there's no way.
You're making them addicted. I tell the kids, my students, older ones, I'll say, what are you going to do if the I-5 corridor collapses or the electrical grid collapses for 6 months? It's plausible. It just happened in Florida.
Oh, sure.
I have a friend in Florida, in North Carolina, from that storm. She told me the day before yesterday her power is going to be out for a month. Thank goodness her landlord has generators.
Well, we've violated Mother Nature's principle of synergy.
Yes.
And she doesn't grow one variety
and
of
reciprocity.
Trees. She grows hundreds and thousands of varieties of plants and trees, hundreds and thousands of varieties of animals that provide things for us. And we've gone to single source electricity, single source sewage, single source agribusiness that is ruining the soil, but providing cheap food, not very nutritious food, not very good food. So for the reason to one of your three there, expediency or whatever, convenience and cheapness, we're sacrificing our future.
Exactly.
And we've got to be tougher than
we do. More resilient, more inventive.
Yeah.
And well, the longer we wait, the tougher thing is going to come in.
Did you read *Sapiens*?
No, I think you told me about that before, though.
I can't remember the author's name, but it doesn't matter. The big point I got was that human beings conquered because they cooperated.
And the drivers were comfort and convenience, and I accept that. But we have to become conscious about what the devastating impact of our comfort and convenience means in modernity.
Yeah, my point, a little different than yours, is if we don't get back to cooperation, we won't be able to adapt to the overshoot of our ecological systems that are in. They're going to happen. A certain amount. Well, we see this every year with increased forest fires, increased weather turbulence,
floods.
There's a lot of stuff baked in, and we can adapt and make the best of that. What we gotta work together as human beings and recognize everybody doesn't know everything, and somebody knows something you don't know.
Exactly.
And if we would take the time before we talk to another person about something is that we check sources. Just because somebody confirms my bias, that doesn't mean I'm right or they're right. So I've got to check my sources. So before you pass on information, make sure it's real. And we don't want to do that now. We want to pass on crap that comes out of our pea brain and our gut saying, oh, there's no such thing as man-induced climate change. I'm sure of it. And I heard it on the internet and my whatever, that there isn't that. So evidently it doesn't really exist. And I'm not saying science is always right, but the problem is that we've denigrated the notion of people who do study stuff, be it medical or ecological.
It's messy business.
Yeah, and nuance is uncomfortable for some people.
Yes.
A lot of people want black and white.
Exactly.
I want an answer, yes or no. I don't
Right.
want the in-between.
Sorry.
Most of life is gray.
In between.
Most of life is in between.
And
That's that tension we have to hold. When we disagree with someone, we have to say, hey, you may be right. I disagree with totally everything you've said so far, but I may be wrong and you may be right. And they have to feel the same about me. And then we can talk more deeply, check sources. I can learn, you can learn, and we can grow together.
I just had this thought, historically there was this famous saying, 2 heads are better than 1. Because traditionally speaking, that might be true. If you come to an impasse in the trail, whether it's a stream, a river, a mountain, whatever, it might be good to process with even a semi-friendly human being how you might survive moving forward, right? And these days, you don't hear that anymore because nobody thinks 2 heads are better than 1. They think
unless they're your
their
buddy's
own head along with their little smartphone.
Or their buddies' heads that think like they do.
But the fact of the matter is, and I respect you so much for the way you're putting many of these concepts, as you can tell, I've thought about a lot of these things as well. And, when I was a kid, on Sunday nights at my grandparents' house in the 60s, after dinner, we'd get ready to watch The Wonderful World of Disney. That was in the era of Walt sitting down at his desk in his office to introduce the show. Yeah. But that was after a half an hour of Mutual Omaha's
Wild Kingdom.
Yeah. With what's his name with the white hair? I can't think of that guy's name. Perkins, maybe, I don't know.
Yes, his name.
And having become a globally published photographer myself, it always struck me when I started kind of my own cognitive behavioral therapy the last 25 years that the camera and the lens has been a humongous tool for scientists and mindful people for a very long time, and that for now, then in the year 2000 and moving forward, there were beginning to be so many cameras all over the world until now everyone has a high-resolution image capturing device which is a scientific tool in the right hands. But science is messy, but it's the only way we learn anything, and we've learned a lot, and we've figured out a lot of things. It just so happens that there's a lot more to know.
Supposedly we know about 0.01% about how the universe works as our brilliant human minds go. And I agree with you, science certainly has done wonders for us.
Right.
But we need to now know how to learn with our hearts, to open ourselves up. I heard an interesting story about Carl Jung, the psychologist, interviewing, I believe it was a Hopi Indian. And he said, what do you think of us white guys? And the Hopi Indian says, oh, you got pointy noses, pointy chins, and you're always wanting something more, always striving for something more. We think you're crazy. And Jung was taken aback by that. He thought, And he said, well, how do you think? Well, we don't think with our heads. We think if you think with your head, you're crazy. You need first to understand how to think with your heart. And you learn to think with your heart by observing nature as a little child when you're open to real learning.
Yes.
Preschool.
Yes.
Those kinds of things. and the Dalai Lama has supported this. We have forgotten how to be aware of what's happening on Mother Earth.
That's right.
And that awareness is where you tap in and
To the depth of your humanity.
yeah, and so the Native American that Carl Jung talked to wasn't too keen on his white brothers
Yeah.
because we were too in our heads, too striving.
There's a fourth podcast that we'll need to do. Being a white man in 2025.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll save that one for after the election. Because the election may have an impact on any number of other things. I think we've been going. Let me double check and see if I can tell how long we've been going. We've been going for over an hour.
Wow.
So I'm fine to continue, or we could wrap it and we can do it again. We can cover something else maybe that you wanted to particularly share. If there was anything out of context of the kind of continuum that I was pursuing with your life history, I presume that you pursued that do you stay an administrator the rest of your professional life once you had become an administrator?
Yeah, I became a middle school principal, then a high school administrator, and then went back and got another superintendency, and then after that, I taught at the University of Washington and at Lewis and Clark.
Can I ask you a question, a nuanced question maybe? Those years that you were being a superintendent or at that similar level, in your experience, particularly here in Oregon, did you find that many other people in your position of, let's say, superintendent or administrative leaders, I'll just call them principals, what would you say the percentage of those people that you ran into in professional organizations and meetings around the state who had been educators like you, who had started out in classrooms?
Well, the normal way, not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, was they would be a PE teacher, usually a man, and then a principal. They were expected to kind of do that. And I was a bit of an anomaly because I had taught at every level, elementary, middle, and high school,
Right.
before I took over a district of any size.
Which is huge from my perspective.
Well, it gave me an insight.
Yes.
And that little job on Sylvia Islands, he taught me how to run a district by hand.
All by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I did a $500,000 budget on a $5 calculator during Christmas break.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
As a young man.
yeah,
In the early era of
and
technology.
I had to be the transportation supervisor cafeteria, etc. You can't.
Which means occasionally you had to be the bus driver and the cook, probably.
and the custodian.
And the custodian.
Or substitute teacher. I kind of did it all.
Yeah.
And that gave me a lot of empathy and a lot of insight into how things
I
work
bet.
and don't work.
I bet.
So it was wonderful training for that, on-the-job training,
And
which
you-
is really better than out-of-the-book training.
I think so. And you ended up as a district superintendent in Southern Oregon. Was that the last stint that you had
In public education.
in public
Yeah,
education? And what was that as? Superintendent of the Ashland School District or
yeah,
something?
that's right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I was guessing on that.
Oh, really?
I could have just as easily said Medford.
No, they humorously called Ashland the People's Republic of Ashland because it was surrounded by Medford, which was very conservative. And my
And the
colleagues,
state of Jefferson.
but within Ashland was everything. We had ultra-conservative, terminal hippies.
Right.
I mean, we had everything in between.
Right.
And
I can imagine that.
It was much more of a juggling act because if you have a more monoculture to serve,
Yes.
you know your boundaries.
Yes.
I had to really be awake.
How many schools were there?
There were 5 schools, 5 elementary schools, 1 high school, and 1 middle school. At that time, our high school was in the 4A. That was the big high school league. And during the 12 years I was there, we really excelled. The teachers did a wonderful job. They really did. We had a partnership with Manhattan Theater Group in conjunction with Ashland's Theater Group. So the arts were very strong. We had a speech and debate program that was nationally recognized. We won the state football championship 3 out of the 12 years, and we're in the playoffs almost every year. Anyway, we were really excelling, and I never talked test. I was a little bit of a wolf on the fringe as a superintendent. I didn't like single-focused objective tests.
Right. Yeah.
I believe in broad-based assessment.
One-dimensional looks.
Yeah, I want broad-based assessment that will help the teacher learn what they need to do better to help the kid grow. And so you have to talk to everybody at the beginning of a school year. I never said we're going to beat our last year's test scores, but we did. But I never mentioned that. I said, take the child when they walk in the door, where they are, as far as you can take them. That's all you can do.
How much was there music down there? How much music did you have down there?
Oh, we had a great music program.
Good.
Yeah.
And when did you retire from there?
2000.
And what did you do after that?
That's when I was I worked for the state as a kind of a little job called a school facilitator to help underperforming schools, but it was an ill thought of idea.
State of Oregon or Washington?
Yeah, state of Oregon.
Okay.
I mean, a school has a culture, and you bring in, quote, an expert. They're about as welcome as, give me the worst metaphor you can think of. I mean, they're not welcome, really. And even though the expert that comes in may know something, you can't implement productive change without understanding the people and the culture, and that takes time. And the program lasted a couple of years.
It involves a scary word, I believe. Intimacy.
Yeah, it does.
We haven't incorporated the concept of intimacy in our vernacular in modernity in the proper way. This is intimacy.
You know, we spent a lot of money training former administrators and superintendents to go in and, quote, fix underperforming schools, and it was BS. I thought it was BS. Unless that person is there for 5 years to help them, becoming part of their
team.
culture, part of the team.
Yeah.
So they're not worried about you. They accept that you're there to help them grow and be better.
This is another podcast, John. We're up to number 5, which is the culture surrounding the physical cultures at schools, which I have a lot to say about because I sub in these 5 rural school districts.
Yeah, I bet you got an insight into different management
around me,
and practice and culture.
Or lack thereof, yeah. So how long did that last?
I only did it for a year.
And then were you done? Were you retired, complete retirement? And by the way...
And then I substitute administrator. I was living on the coast, and so I was a middle school assistant principal and a high school assistant principal, you know, as to help out for a couple of months here, a couple of months there, that kind of thing. Those were very interesting experiences because I was used to being the guy that made the decisions, and when you come in as an assistant principal, you're basically the disciplinarian. And again, I didn't know the culture, didn't know the kids, and that's really challenging. I almost got in trouble with the law. This kid.
Oh my God.
This kid. One quick example. It's kind of humorous. There was 2 lunch periods at this middle school. And so half the kids were in class. Well, this kid was in the hallway, and the class was going on. And on the locker, he was doing a drum, pum, 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 on the wall locker. You can imagine what it sounded like in that classroom. Yeah. Jesus, they bong, bong. So
doesn't help a substitute out.
I leapt across the hallway. I grabbed him and set him against the wall. I said, "Stay there until everybody's in their classroom, and we'll talk." And he said, "Okay," and he was frightened of me and all that. I said, "Do you know why I grabbed you off the wall locker?" "Well, I was just pounding on the wall locker." I said, "Do you know what was going on the other side of the wall locker?" "No." "Well, it was a math class that probably didn't do math while you were pounding." When you're in the hallway, you got to understand that you're not the only one alive, that other people are trying to learn. And are we done with this? You got it? I got it. Well, 5 minutes after, or 15 minutes after school's out, I'm invited to the principal's office from my office.
I bet you were.
And this mother's there with this little child. And a police officer is there. And she says, this man abused my son. I said, really? You don't know what I've done to kids. He didn't abuse him. But anyway, tell me more. And he said, well, look at this bruise. And it was an angry yellow on his shoulder. I said, well, how did you get that? He said, well, when you grabbed me and pulled me over to the wall, I hit and the police officer looked at me and he says, that couldn't have happened because that was only an hour ago. That bruise is probably 12 to 24 hours. What happened? And the kid put his head down. He says, well, I was screwing up at football practice and the whole team had to run laps. And so they beat me up, to tell me not to do that again. Oh, but here I am. The cop was going to read me my rights, but fortunately he had some physiological education.
You had some forensics
evidence.
But
he knew that a bruise couldn't turn yellow in an hour and a half.
15 minutes.
Or whatever. Anyway, that's just one of the stories. So I probably learned more about education subbing in the little coastal town.
So this has been really wonderful. I think we should end it.
Okay.
Now, I want to say, however, you met Barb in Southern Oregon when you were both working in that district. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your lovely wife.
Yes.
So I want to make sure that you share with her that this was a very positive experience, because I would like you to come back and do it again, and I would like her to come do it again. And if we wanted to, we could do it 3 at a time at some point too, and there might be cause to do that at some point.
Okay.
But now, when are you guys leaving this state?
End of the month.
So this will be for season next year.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because John and Barb spend much of the rather gray, cool, and stormy winters of the Willamette Valley in Hawaii. And that's a wonderful thing. Yeah. And but this has been really fun and really good, and I think particularly, and I appreciate you going with the flow with me, because I want it to be natural, and that's how we make that happen. And so if you want to come back before you leave, you can, but if not, we'll do it when you get back.
Okay.
And
if the reviews are raving, they might want more. Probably not.
No, well, yes and no. I mean, the reviews are one thing, the thumbs up are another thing, the views, et cetera, et cetera. Again, a lot of this is for posterity. This is what I'm choosing to do with my day today, and for the cause that is this substrate reality that I've created here and the ability to do this. Yeah. And you're helping me illustrate it. So there's a win-win situation going on all the way around, while you're telling some of your story, which I think is really, really, really valid, valuable, and wonderful to hear. And particularly for me, as educator and the vice president of the Oregon Substitute Teacher Association, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I think we could have some additionally valuable discussions just dedicated to that we may perceive to not have necessarily that much value right this second, but based on how fast the world is moving, I would say they might have more value than we can even imagine at some point moving forward, just by virtue of the fact that we're two people with our two perspectives coming from our era in history, sharing notions, thoughts, and ideas mindfully about the experience of being a human being, and what it takes to be a reasonably successful and conscientious human being, John. So I appreciate it very much. And what I have to do at this point is lean over and shake your hand.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'm going. Is that all good, or did you?
Fine.
Because the next thing that's going to happen is Barb's going to be knocking on the door, because I locked the door, because I don't want to have any unexpected surprises. Anybody who knows me or wants to be in touch knows how to be in touch with me. So what I have to do now is walk over to the laptop and shut this all down, all this bad boy digital audio, analog and digital technology. Please say hello and goodbye to John Daggett. Wave to the camera, John.
Bye.
And thank you so much again
You're welcome.
for coming and helping me invent something that seems to be a novelty. We're seeing a lot of podcasts, but I don't know that we're... Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming. I don't know that we're seeing them from places like Mount Angel, Oregon, with real people like us, you know. So that's why I wanted to do this, and I really appreciate it. And now I'm pressing stop streaming, and then it says you will